welcome to our ZEF colloquium today. And today we have a very special guest speaker, Ritya Avkar, whom some of you know already very well. So Ritya did her PhD at ZEF, and currently she is working as an education economist at the World Bank, where she works mainly on education efficiency and quality, and also the related gender issues. So today she will present her recent research on inclusion in Indonesia's education sector, again with a focus on gender and disability issues. Ritya, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here in ZEF Colloquium. It's really my pleasure to be here. So I hope you can hear my voice well. I mean, in case my voice is breaking, it's because of the internet connection, maybe not stable. As in Indonesia, it's a very common. So happy to see some familiar faces. It's been a while. Hope you all in very good condition and healthy. So for today, Lucas actually asked me to present some of my work. He came across a couple of report and studies that we just recently published in the World Bank Office Jakarta. So hopefully it's not so boring. Today, I'm gonna share some of the findings on one of the studies about inclusion in education sector in Indonesia, in particular on the gender gaps as well as education for children with disabilities. So let me share my screen. Wait. Doesn't open. Hold on 1 second. Sometimes the technology doesn't really cooperate, but let me. Why it's not here? It's already open, but it's not.
We cannot see it.
Hold on 1 second. Maybe because I have too many. Okay, I'm sorry for this.
No problem. If you prefer, maybe you can send it to me and I will share it from my screen.
Let me try again. Okay, so I think this is. Yeah, so can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, it's sorry. Okay, that's great. So let me, okay. Let me just stop my video so that it's not too heavy for the connection. Okay. Okay. So little bit of the country context. Maybe some of you already know Indonesia, the fourth most populated country, and the government system is highly decentralized. We are a very diverse country, 300 distinct ethnic groups, over 700 languages and dialects, which makes the education system is more complicated. This diversity also extends to religion. 87% is Muslim. Other religions include Protestant, Catholic, Hindu, and Buddhist. And on the Indonesia education sector, so as we are fourth most populated country, so we are also the fourth largest education system in the world. We have about more than 260,000 schools of all types in Indonesia, from primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary. And then the number of students is about 53 million. And they are enrolled in formal education, either public or private school, and there are two ministries that oversee them, Ministry of Education and Culture and Ministry of Religious Affairs. So most of the students actually enrolled in MOEC school. It is like general education, but 15% of all primary and secondary students enrolled in schools administered by MORA. So schools under MORA, the Ministry of Religious Affairs, actually mostly madrasah, so mostly for Muslim students. They are legally required to deliver the same national curriculum as general schools under MOEC, although the number of teaching hours of religious instruction is higher in MORA schools. This is just to give a little bit background. So the private schools in under MORA, for school under MORA, is actually make up the most, like 92%. However, if we say here private schools, it's actually more on like low cost private schools that are attended by students from low socioeconomic background. So it's not like posh or very expensive private schools that usually seen in big cities, but this is more on like low cost private schools for the poorer students. So this study actually conducted with the motivation written here, right? The Ms. Sri Mulyani, the Minister of Finance, and Retno Marsudi, Minister of Foreign Affairs. They said the population of Indonesia has reached around 260 million. Half of them are female. There's a tremendous potential from their economic participation. In addition to their strategic role within the family. So big potential of the woman that might not be maximally realized. And then the second motivation is the figure of the out of school for disabilities. So out of school figure for children with disability is much higher compared to children without disabilities. And this inequality that exists in the opportunity to get education is due to one's physical and mental limitations. So basically these two things that motivate us to further examine the gender and inclusion differences in education, which aim to provide some recommendation, policy recommendation of what we can do, what the policymakers can do. So actually this presentation has been presented to policymakers in Indonesia. And then, it's actually received quite a, positive reaction from them. So hopefully it can influence the policy making decision that they are doing. So we combine quantitative and qualitative method using various kind of data. From here, I just listed down all the data that we have. Indonesia actually has a good data collection from survey, socioeconomic household survey, labor force survey, and then administrative data directly from MOEC and also from MORA, from the ministries. And then we took also ourselves our data collection through focus group discussion and interviews with the government, both at central and local level. So as I said that Indonesia is highly decentralized. So the education system actually, yes, overseen by the two ministries at central level, but also in the case of general schools, it's also managed by more than 500 local governments at district levels. So we did an interview with MOEC and MORA officials, and also Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, as well as education official at school, madrasah. So madrasah is the school for Muslim students under MORA in two provinces, in East Java and South Kalimantan. So maybe like, on the average, at the national level, Indonesia has actually achieved gender parity in school enrollment rate. So if we see here in 1970s, the GPI or the gender parity index in school enrollment was still more in favor to boys, where the GPI was less than 1. The enrollment rate for boys much higher than those for women. For children aged 7 to 12 years, the GPI is 0.89. And this has continued to improve until around 2019, and I believe it's still stagnant until now. The GPI is already 1, which means the school enrollment rate for girls is already the same with the school participation rate for boys. So we also see the same progress at higher level of education, at the junior secondary level or also at the senior secondary level. And then, however, even though at the national level, the statistics show that the gender gap is already low, I mean, which is like already closing, almost closing. However, the gap is still quite significant at the regional level. So for example, at the primary level, the GPI in one of the city in the Sulawesi, Kota Mobagu, has the enrollment rate much higher than enrollment rate for girls is greater than for men with the GPI 1.15. While on the other hand, on the central Buton, it's still in Sulawesi, the NER for boys is actually higher. It's actually higher than for girls. So we also see some of the differences in junior secondary level as well as in senior secondary level. So this is just like showing some example where even though at the national level, the gap is already, I mean, the GPI is already 1, more or less, but at the secondary level, at the subnational level, it's still, the gap is still quite significant. So each region has different conditions. So, but some potential reason that is often found is a cultural norms that see the place where women are at home and the role of men as the head of family who must be the provider of the the breadwinner. But our field research actually provide different insights. For example, parents' perception. Parents prefer to enroll their daughter from sons to schools because girls seems to enjoy learning more and have less behavioral challenges. There's also a concern, on the availability of schools of university in specific district or cities, because not all district or cities have university, especially in higher education. So these affect the participation, especially for girls. So talking about the student performance, so we see that female students have here better performance than male students. We can see here, for example, in the Ujian Nasional is actually the national exam for junior and junior secondary students and senior secondary students. So we see that girls actually perform better than boys. And learning poverty also, the number of the percentage of population, the percentage of girls who cannot read by the age of the 10, if I'm mistaken. So it's lower than boys with reading comprehension. And then in the PISA score as well, in all the 3 subjects, PISA is an international test conducted for 15-year-old. In most of the participating countries are OECD, but Indonesia is one of them, even though on average, Indonesia's performance is far lower than other countries in the region, as well as in other countries with a similar level of development. But if we look at the country data, girls seems to perform better than boys. So a couple of potential reasons Girls, for example, here girls reported to be more diligent, mature, and focused on their studies. This is we've got a sense from our field research. Boy reported to spend more time playing games, likely wake up late for school. I mean, yeah, this is like a couple of basically like from discussion with parents and as well as with teachers. Here, we also found, I mean, there's a studies looking at the specific comparison, like boys are more likely to miss school than girls, with 50% of boys reporting missing school at least 1 day a month compared to 44% of girls. And one interesting finding from other study in Indonesia that actually found that boys' lower grades and higher absenteeism actually correlated with their lower socio-emotional skills, demotivating mindset, low aspiration, and perception of classroom environment. For example, it's the proportion of boys who actually aim to reach the highest education degree is lower than for female students, for example. There are a couple of other things related with the socio-emotional skill, like for example, on the growth mindset as well. So girls are found to have more growth mindset rather than boys, and we found this in another study, not in this particular study, but they found that boys actually, these socio-emotional skills actually are correlated with the lower grades for boys. Moving on to the school completion. Oops. Yeah. So female students are observed to stay in school longer with a slightly lower prevalence of out of school than male students. So if you look at the main reason for students dropping out of school, there are differences between the reason that was put forward by girls and boys. So for example, about 52% of households with boys who drop out reported that the economic condition were the main reason for them to drop out, while female students reported around 44% here. The insufficient fund and the working reasons. The marriage factor was also cited more frequently by households with girls who drop out than households with boys. And as we see here, among other issues, I mean, in child marriage in Indonesia still higher than in other countries such as Vietnam, Philippines, Myanmar, and Cambodia, for example, although it's still lower than in Mexico and India, but overall it's still quite high. It's about 22%. Moving on to teaching and school leadership. So we actually also looked at how the education workforce for men and women. So gender parity is also still an issue in education workforce. So while both men and women teach, but it is actually men who get to manage. So in schools, both under Ministry of Education and Culture, and as well as under Ministry of Religious Affairs, women actually represent more than half of the total teachers from primary, junior secondary, and senior secondary level. But when it comes to managing and leading schools, in this case for to be promoted becoming school principals, the data shows that actually male dominates the role of school principal. So for example, only 31% of total madrasah principal at primary level are women, and this figure is even smaller for higher education level at junior secondary or senior secondary. The figure for MOEC is still higher, a little bit higher. So for example, 43% of the total principal at primary level women compared to only 31% at Mora schools there is women. So some of the insights that we get is women, especially those who already have become mothers, they lack of time and actually interest in pursuing the promotion to become a principal. There are also cases where husbands do not allow them to pursue the promotion to take up more senior position. On the in overall labor force participation, as we've seen before, that Indonesian, girls actually have higher performance, and then girls have higher education performance, human capital performance than boys. That the participation rate for women in the labor force is actually much less compared to men. Only 50% compared to men at the 80%. So one of the World Bank study, they found that Indonesian women in urban areas who live with elderly family members take up to 2 years after childbirth to return to work. So, and for women without elderly family members, this period can be twice as long due to lack of childcare option. Yeah, and we also try to see the differences in wages. In some of the industries, the GPI for wages and salaries are varied. So in some of the industries are higher for women, but in most of the industries it's lower for women. So we also hear, this is just citing one of the studies from the MGI, that there's an estimate showing that Indonesia could add actually about 135 billion a year to annual GDP by 2025 with, these three drivers. Obviously the higher female labor force participation, higher share of female working full-time rather than part-time, more women working in higher productivity sectors such as manufacturing instead of agriculture. So I'm just looking at the time. So very quickly on children with disabilities. So we actually have some, a bit difficulties in getting the data for the children with disabilities because of a different definition used by different data set, and then also some of the data accuracy also an issue in administrative data from the ministries. But we just try to use what we have, and then we basically see here that the prevalence of children with disability is quite low at both the primary and secondary education level. More than 1/4 children with disability at junior high school are actually out of school, and then the level of out of school is much higher than those of children without disability. This is pretty obvious, but this is something that we also want to look at. The figure out of school rate is also higher for women than boys. It's a 32% compared to 23%. So these, of course, deserve a closer look given the importance of inclusive education. But from our field research, some of the challenges faced in education services for students with disabilities include, for example, stigma and discrimination against children with disabilities, prevent them from getting the help that they need. and then schools are not prepared to teach children with disabilities. So in most, many schools, also regular school, they also accept children with disabilities. However, they are not well equipped, both from the equipment side to support the children with disabilities, as well as from the teachers' capability, teachers' capacity to help them, because obviously it needs different skills. Pedagogical skills also will be different. So in general, schools are not really prepared to teach children with disabilities. There is also some governance issue on the implementation guidelines, like which level of government responsible for the management of teaching children with disabilities, because related with the decentralized system. So in one of the regulation, it's actually said the special education, like education for children with disabilities, are actually managed by district, but managed by province. But then the primary level primary education is actually managed by the district. So this, like province and the district levels, in the field, we also find that they think that it's not their responsibility, because, for example, for the province government, they thought that it's a district responsibility. So, and the other way around. So that's why we see that there is this issue also in the regulation and in the guidelines. Next is insufficient resources to adequately service the needs of children with disabilities and to adapt learning spaces to be more inclusive. This is like the factor that often cited by the government, also by schools. They have insufficient resources. Although in one of other studies on the public expenditure review, education public expenditure review. So Indonesia actually spent quite a lot in terms of percentage of national spending is 20% allocated for education. 20% of national budget is allocated for education. So some of the issues, obviously related with the inefficiency and also accountability. There are a lot of problems in the expenditure side, but it is maybe it's true insufficient, but the government should there are a lot of room for improvement to improve the efficiency side first, rather than adding some more resources directly. And then so just wrapping up from the quantitative analysis, and also from the insights that we got from the field research. So we saw earlier, women's performance is actually higher than men in terms of school participation and also learning outcomes, but there are very significant variation at the regional level. So each district or each region has its own characteristic, and so there's no one size fits all solution in this case. And although women have better learning outcome, this doesn't really directly translate into labor market, where actually female work less and they earn less in some of the industry, and they get promoted less. And therefore, meaningful examination on how to raise the status of women in society is required. And yeah, children with disability, we've seen that they continue to face significant disadvantages. So with this, what can actually be done now? So as we've seen the significant variation at subnational level, it is crucial to work with the policymaker, decision maker at the subnational level to identify the gender gaps and local solution that actually can narrow the gaps. Second, expanding opportunities for female teachers. So this is related with the less women get promoted. So expanding opportunities for female teachers to get training or promotion. So why this is important? I mean, obviously the lack of women in leadership position, meaning that female students do not have many role models to become leaders. So this makes even more difficult for girls to envision themselves to become a leader for their future. Providing childcare facilities, as we've seen a couple of concerns raised during the field research as well, to support women's balancing work and family responsibilities. And related with children with disabilities, lots of things actually, starting from improving the data system, because now it's not really able to capture more detailed information on students with disabilities. Designing school buildings and other education facilities to enable an accessible and inclusive learning environment, reflecting principles of equity in the curriculum and also assessment. And this is also like very important thing, like providing teacher and principal with initial training on inclusive education, because as I explained before, that schools actually not really ready to accept or to teach children with special needs. And lastly, supporting teachers to enrich and adapt their strategies to students with diverse educational needs. So lots of recommendations, but yeah, this is like what we have. And then we, as I said, we presented this to the policymakers in Indonesia, and then continue to discuss this with them for improvement in the policymaking decision. So that's all from me. Hopefully you're still there. Thank you so much for listening. So looking forward for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritya, for your presentation. I think everyone in this public would agree that the issues you discussed, so gender disparity and also inclusion of people with disabilities, very important topic from many perspectives. And especially, I think a lot of researchers at ZEF, both junior and senior researchers, work on gender issues especially and contribute to this type of literature. However, what I think is particularly important probably in your work is also inclusion into your research of the topic of people with disabilities, because that's definitely something that is still missing in research on development in many countries. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions or comments to you or to your presentation. So the floor is now open for the discussion. You can ask your questions either by raising your hands, or you can simply use the chat function as well, and then I will read your question or comments. So please, the floor is open. Alisher, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rita, for your very interesting presentation. Perhaps one aspect I would like to get your opinion, also perhaps suggest for this study, is based on what we learned in a similar study from Ethiopia by Essa Musa. So when he looked at the job market performance and earnings of children, comparing those who went to school and then who combined schooling with working, what he actually found that those who were combining work and school were achieving better results, so higher incomes. And the way he interpreted this was because when children were combining work and school, they were also getting additional skills in addition to the formal education. There were also additional skills. Most probably, it could be summarized as social capital. they were getting social capital. And from that perspective, you explained that girls are outperforming boys in Indonesia in terms of educational performance. But when it comes to job market situation, perhaps it's not, they are lagging behind. So I was wondering, perhaps if you include the social capital dimension. So if boys are dropping out of school and starting work earlier, on one sense, or I don't know, maybe boys would have more opportunities to gain more social capital for different reasons. So I was wondering if you include that dimension, perhaps it could also provide a kind of a useful angle, both in terms of understanding what's happening, but also in terms of where government action could help bridge these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you, Alisher. Ritya, maybe you would like to respond directly.
Yeah, thank you, Alisher, for the question. So yeah, we didn't include that particular the social capital to the analysis. However, I agree that I mean having, I mean, as you said, yeah, maybe like boys who drop out early and then they enter the labor market and then they get the new skills. So in one of the area that we are working on, also on the skills development, I mean, that's even actually more complicated in Indonesia, because like the stakeholders are much bigger. So we are also trying to engage with the policymakers in the ministries whose work on the skills agenda. But the I mean, the stakeholders are more, there are much more stakeholders. There are more ministries involved, and also the unmatch between the skill, the demand, and the supply, the demand of the skills, and then what's actually the labor market having. We don't have the sufficient data to look into more on that part. But I think it's yeah, it would be interesting to look at that, maybe for the future, for the future research, or maybe the continuation for this work. Thank you so much, Alisher.
Thank you. We have another question or comment, this time from Dennis. Dennis, please.
Thank you, Saneta, and thank you, Ritya, for your interesting presentation. Was wondering, many of the constraints that girls face in education, particularly girls with disabilities, are shared across the world, no? Because of the patriarchal ways of society, in which societies are structured, that have to do with social norms, with prejudice, and others. So I was wondering if one of your recommendations, or maybe more of your recommendations that we couldn't see in detail, addresses specifically a recommendation for the reality in Indonesia, for this particular reality of your country, because otherwise, as I said at the beginning, these are characteristics that unfortunately are shared across the world, no? This disadvantage that girls face in education. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Maybe, Ritya, let me also give the floor to Araceli, and then you could answer to both Dennis and Araceli. So Araceli, please.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this interesting presentation. Something that called my attention was in your presentation, you had the law of interest as a cause for this promotion issue. So this is something that I have identified before in the literature about why women don't study science or ICT's careers. So I think that also it is true, women may have less aspiration for professional growth. so low of interest could be true, that we need to have in mind that it is due to different factors like caregiving roles, for instance. So talking about lack of interest could be maybe risk. So maybe we need to be careful with that. And because I think that it should be clear that this is almost always not limited by will, rather is this by the socio-economical and cultural issues and conditions to seek promotion in leadership position. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Araceli. So Ritia, the floor is yours again.
So maybe from Araceli first, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, it had to be. I mean, it's actually combination of the situation that they not only lack of interest, but maybe in the first place they have, as I said, lack of time, and then lack of and then because of the lack of time, and then the lack of time to seek for a better opportunity or to get promoted, because it's, I mean, one of actually, yeah, this is also reminds me that the promotion structure is not is not really straightforward, in the sense that you have to be, I mean, you have to apply, and then you have to wait for answers, and then once you apply for training, and then when you get into the training, there are a couple of examination and steps, and then so it's like a long way to get into an area for a promotion, or even like to get a chance to be promoted, even to get a training to become a candidate for school principals. There's also still, there are some quota, and then there's also issue there. The schools for the training is not available in all districts, so only in particular districts. So meaning that they have to travel, and then so when they have to travel, especially for teachers in remote areas or in outer island, they have to travel far, for example, leaving their family, and then who will take care of family. So I mean, maybe they, yes, but I agree with you. We have to be careful and saying that it's a lack of interest, but also like the situation that makes them, it's a combination between like lack of time, lack of a situation that makes them becoming becoming less interest. For, I'm sorry, for the first question, Zaneta, can you because the connection was breaking. Was it like about the specific recommendation specific for Indonesia that is not? Is that a good question?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Oh, Denise, maybe you want to briefly repeat your question since you are on already.
Yes, of course. Many of the factors you mentioned that put girls at disadvantage in education are common around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And are not only specific for Indonesia. And I was wondering if among the recommendations that you didn't have the time to detail, if you could tell us one or more recommendations that are specific for Indonesian reality. That was the question.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
So yeah. So I think like in because the condition of Indonesia, like the very diverse, and then as we've seen that if we look at the national average, it looks okay. The gap is not so big. Actually, the girls actually perform higher in higher education in terms of enrollment. But if we look at the regional level and subnational level, and then the gap could be like very striking. So, and I think like this may not necessarily, I mean, maybe not really unique only for Indonesia. Other countries also have a decentralized system and also like very diverse. But I think for Indonesia, this particular recommendation on to work with the local governments, because again, the system is highly decentralized, and then the education system actually managed, overseen by the ministry at central level, but actually directly managed by the local government. And we have like more than 500 local governments overseeing, because we have like more than 500 districts. So working directly with the local government to identify what actually making the problem, both in enrollment, both in education performance, what drives the gap, and then identify the local solution, because no one size fits all solution for in Indonesia. Yeah, I think that would be my specific for Indonesia, recommendation for Indonesia.
Thank you. Now, Professor von Braun.
Thank you, thank you, Ritja. Very important observations from you and your colleagues. I have a question related to disability and investment. The World Bank has since quite some time a focus on addressing disability. We have a wonderful global disability advisor, Charlotte McLean, who is a good friend of us at CEF, and she is in this job for quite some time. And there are the disability reports continuously outlining from the World Bank that there is about 1 billion people disabled around the world, and 200 million seriously disabled. But governments don't invest enough to give them not only a fair chance, but to tap into their potentials. What has Indonesia done, and what has the World Bank in Indonesia done in terms of investing in disabled people to bring them up to their potentials and overcome discrimination?
Thank you, Professor. Let me also take the question from Sundus, and then we will give you back the mic, Ritja. So Sundus, please.
Thank you, Janetta, and thank you, Ritja. I was just wondering if you could, if you have any observations on the labor market outcomes for children who attend madrasas, and especially for girls who attend madrasas, because as I understand it, is that the education that they're receiving there is not always compatible with the labor markets. And also something else that you mentioned was that for girls, one big reason for dropping out from school was because of marriage. And I was wondering if there are different minimum ages of marriage in different regions, and does that have an effect on the regional differences in terms of how many girls drop out because of marriage? Thank you.
Thank you, Sundus. Ritja, please.
Okay, so investment in children for the children with disabilities. So unfortunately, excuse me. So unfortunately, as I mentioned before, that Indonesia spend a lot on education. However, for the children disability, it's a pretty minor, I would say. It's not really yet prioritized, because I think now, I mean, the government still focus on more on basic education, since secondary education. So actually, in not to mention, not to say that the children with disability is less important than the early childhood education. For example, early childhood education is more in more general topic, but even for the early childhood education, the government also spend like very less. So the subnational government only spend around 2.6% of their total budget for early childhood education. So, and I don't have the specific calculation for the children with disabilities. It's, I mean, part of the reason because of the data structure is basically like very complicated. So it's not possible to identify like how much actually they spend for the children with disabilities, but it's very, very small. So it's, yeah, unfortunately, it's not really yet prioritized in terms of the budget. However, on the from regulation perspective, it is clearly said in the law that education is for everyone, and then the government should provide education for free for everyone. And then I think like there is also one regulation saying that the schools actually cannot charge money to parents for enrolling their children to school. So that's also include for all, like including for children with disabilities. So the regulations are there. However, the enforcement of the regulation is still an issue. Part of the reason, yes, the resources are not really flowing to that particular subsector, yeah, the enforcement also still a big problem. In terms of the World Bank for, I mean, education for children with disabilities, what we are more focusing our work for providing technical assistance by doing, for example, the analytical work, trying to identify, I mean, by doing research like the one that I shared, and then also some technical assistance directly to the ministry, in more on, like, for example, on the data side, because as I mentioned before, that there's discrepancy in and inaccuracy from the data that the ministry have. So we are basically providing technical assistance on how to make sure that the data collected in efficient way and the data that is collected is accurate. However, it's still within that scope. So we don't have really operation targeting the children with disabilities, or especially in education, but it's more on like building research and then helping the government with this technical assistance with the data side, for example. So I hope that answered your question.
Let me just quickly make a suggestion.
Yeah.
You can be more convincing with the data. It may require a small survey, but if you can come up with a figure that the returns to investment in children with disability is higher, that's my hypothesis, than the average investment in education, because there is a hidden discrimination which prevents these children to live up to their potentials. You may be able to convince the Minister of Finance to borrow from the World Bank for an education program targeted at children with disability. So you need to come to the economics of this investment, is my recommendation. It's not, it may be half of a doctorate dissertation, but you have written a beautiful one. You can do another half.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So that's also like one of the thing that we try to pitch with the early childhood, which basically showing that return to investment in early childhood is basically like much higher than investing less, investing a little bit later to the primary and junior secondary, for example. But yeah, we are still in progress making it to the success. So far, they are still prioritizing primary and then junior secondary and senior secondary. So yeah, hope for the next step. Thank you, Professor Van Bell.
Thank you, Ritya. Maybe before, in case you want to answer Sundu's question, I would read the question from Lucas because it's somehow related. So you could answer whichever part you want. So Lucas says, my question relates to the school labor market disparity for girls. What is the rate of girls that continue tertiary education, so university or vocational training? When do they marry, and how has this changed over the course of the last 10, 15 years? And as a follow-up, apart from gender norms, how could the school labor market disparity for girls be reduced? So you can choose whichever part you wish, because we don't have much time left.
So thank you. So I think, yeah, unfortunately, we don't have the differentiation whether the children, for example, I mean, in the related with the Sundul's question, yeah, on the, I think it was like on the labor market for madrasa graduates, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't have good information on that. However, as I mentioned before, that actually madrasa and general schools, they actually have the same curriculum. So what's different? So they still learning about mathematics, literacy. I mean, literally, like all the curriculum is still the same. The only difference is that madrasa have a bigger or like higher number of teaching hours for religion subject. So maybe, I mean, maybe a little bit confusing when we differentiate between madrasa and maybe it's called pesantren. So it's more on like religious school. So it's non-formal. So where they learn more about the Quran, where they learn about the Hafiz, and I mean like lots of other Islamic studies topic. So that's not the one in madrasa. So there's a different school. It's a non-formal. So I think maybe Sundu has, I mean, refer to that particular education type. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't have. So I mean, logically, it's since the curriculum that taught in madrasa is similar with the with the ones taught in regular school. So the graduates also more or less having the same skills. We have some evidence that actually, according to PISA scores, that madrasa students perform just a little bit lower than regular school students. So there's not much difference, a little bit lower, but not that much. And then for Lucas' questions, so yeah, we've seen quite a big improvement in terms of the continuation rate from high school to university in the last 10, 15 years. So when do they marry? How has this changed? So yeah, I don't have the stats, but I think this is also relates with Sundul's questions, right? About the minimum age for to get married. We have a national regulation on the minimum age to get married, but there are lots of local governments who actually be more bold in launching their own regulation. So for example, in some district, they have their own regulation and stating the higher minimum age to get married compared to what is stated in the national regulation. So that's why highlighting the importance to work together with the subnational governments at district and province level, because they are the one who actually know and can make the difference, because they are the one who regulate the education system and more closer to the frontliner in the education system. Yeah, so I hope maybe I didn't answer all the questions. I'm sorry, but yeah, I hope it's.
Yeah, thank you, Ritya. Maybe let me ask one last question, because I saw before that Abdul Rashid was raising his hand for a long time. I don't know, Abdul Rashid, if that was any pressing question, or maybe your question was already answered.
Hello, thank you. Much of it was answered, actually. Yeah, but I just wanted to know, are there some like special needs schools in Indonesia? So schools only meant for people with disabilities, and what role do they play?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So there are schools specifically for children with special needs, but the number is very small. The coverage also very small, so it's more unlike located in urban areas. So that's why people in outer island, in remote areas, have very difficult access if they are having children with disabilities. It's more difficult for them to access the school. And the quality also greatly varies. Some of the private schools having high quality, but they charge a lot of money. But more, yeah, some of the public schools for children with disabilities are good, but the numbers and the coverage are still very small. So that's one of the things that we also trying to highlight and recommend to the government to invest more in building and designing schools with to be more inclusive.
Okay, thank you, Ritya. I think we should close by now this meeting, because we are already out of time. So thank you again, Ritya, for your very interesting presentation. Thank you also everyone who participated in this colloquium. We hope to see you, Ritya, again, or stay in touch in the future. So thank you again.
Thank
have
you.
a good afternoon. Have a good evening, Ritya, and see you soon.
Good night over there. Bye-bye.
Bye.